So what we're on to next here, I think we all in the room know that the biggest growth gains that we get come from really balancing excellent long-term brand building with really effective performance marketing. But winning over those other members of the C-suite can be a bit of a challenge for us creatively minded people. So what's coming up next is rooted in insights from WARC's the Multiplier Effect Playbook, which came out today, hot off the presses, and new research from senior ANA members. This session next is going to explore the assumptions that drive the disconnect between us marketers and the C-suite, and more importantly, shares practical frameworks for proving the financial power of building brand and brand itself to CEOs and CFOs. So please welcome to the stage the America's editor at WARC, Anne-Marie Kerwin, and the co-founder of Chubbies and Marathon Engine AI, Preston Rutherford.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. So, as Dan said, thank you for the introduction, Dan. I am Anne-Marie Kerwin. I'm America's editor at WARC. I don't know if everyone is familiar with WARC, but we started because 3 decades ago, David Ogilvy said, no other profession gets by with such a small bank of knowledge as marketing. So WARC picked up that mantle and said, we're going to collect all the data and research and studies we can to prove that marketing can be effective and how it works. So that's what I spend most of my time doing. And I'm joined by Preston Rutherford. Preston, do you want to tell the people who you are?
Would love to. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking some time to hang out with us. Preston Rutherford, co-founder of a consumer brand called Chubbies, known for bright, short shorts, and now applying all of the lessons learned from countless mistakes made, balancing brand building and performance marketing as a small subset of the totality, doing 2 companies, one called Marathon Data and one called Marathon Engine, but broadly around the idea of how do we measure this stuff so we can invest in brand building confidently.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take us back quickly to last year when WARC launched a report called the Multiplier Effect, because it's really the basis for what we're talking about today. And we really launched the Multiplier Effect because we wanted to make the case for an integrated advertising effort. And so I know it was a very long report. Everyone probably didn't read it. So the too long didn't read version is that the central message of the Multiplier Effect is that we really wanted to bring evidence for brand building and push back on the outside spending we were seeing in performance tactics. 3 things to keep in mind as to the evidence of why the multiplier effect works. First, brand really does matter. Stronger brands see stronger performance and build stronger businesses. 2, when you're thinking about advertising, it really has 2 jobs to do, and it works hardest when it does those 2 jobs. The first is you want to make an emotional connection with your out-of-market buyers and give them a reason to remember you. And the second job is to nudge in-market buyers, people who are ready to buy now, to buy your brand at this moment. So the second job works much better if you set them up doing the first job. And the third most important part about the multiplier effect is these 2 jobs are intertwined. So you really need to move away from siloing those 2 jobs with 2 different teams of people looking at doing 2 different goals and maybe not as coordinated as they should be. So it's not brand plus performance. It's better if it's brand times performance, that you're actually coordinating them, because an investment in brand is actually an investment in performance. It'll make your performance that much more effective. So that's a quick version of the multiplier effect. Last year, we went out, we talked about it with lots of people like you, and we kept getting questions. Great, I love this sounds great, but how do we do it? So as Dan said, we're launching today, fresh off the presses, hot, the Multiplier Playbook. It's a practical guide to setting up your organizations, your teams, and your creative output to achieve the multiplier effect. And alongside that, in the last couple of months, we did a survey of ANA members to see what was holding you back from being able to achieve the multiplier effect. And in the Multiplier Playbook, we found 8 blockers to the multiplier effect. And I'm not going to cover all of them today. Preston and I are here today to talk about aligning with the C-suite. Because if you've got buy-in from the C-suite, everything else you do is probably going to be a little bit easier. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to introduce a blocker. I'm going to tell you all what you told me about the blocker. And then we're going to have a little video from people who run companies about how they think about brand. And then Preston is going to give us the play for how you get over the blocker, because, you know, it's a playbook, sports, you know. So that's how we're going to do it. Okay, so here's our first blocker. Your CEO does not believe in brand investment. So in the WARC A&A survey, we asked, at your company, do you think the importance of brand building is recognized by the C-suite? And 67% of you said, yeah, my C-suite recognizes the importance of brand. And we thought, oh, that's great. But then we started digging into it, and here is the disconnect. Only 19% say that their companies routinely link shifts to brand equity to business outcomes. So this gap is the blocker. The CEO may nod at brand, but do they treat it as a business value lever? They're not seeing it as value creation, they're just seeing it as cost to the sale. So we're up to our first video. Do you want to set this up, Preston?
Perfect, yes. Thank you, that was awesome context setting. So this is a video from Dave Powers, who's the former CEO of Deckers Brands, a public company. They own Hoka, the running shoes, UGG, the fluffy shoes, and a variety of other brands. But broadly, I like this video because Deckers has a solid EBITDA multiple in the public markets, growing brands. Hoka, as we all know, is crushing it, growing very quickly off of a multi-billion-dollar base. So it's a pretty solid, I think, example of someone who's very legitimate, a CEO that I would love to emulate, talking about the importance of brand.
Why are all D2C companies getting hammered, Dave?
You know, we've looked at a lot of them, you know, and that when that was really, you know, a happening sector, you know, we got caught up in it too. Like, hey, we need a DTC brand. How can we learn from them, et cetera? But what you find out after a while is the DTC model is hard to keep sustained because you're spending so much on marketing. You know, 25%, 30% of your revenue you're putting back into marketing to fuel the sales. The minute you pull that marketing away to make profit, your sales line drops like a rock. And if you don't have wholesale, if you don't have other sources of revenue, your e-com site quickly goes from high growth, you know, decent profit, low single digits if you're lucky, a lot of times negative, to just, you know, dropping like a rock from both top line and bottom line. What people didn't appreciate at first is if you take away that marketing spend, will the brand still stay on a positive growth trajectory? And what a lot of companies are finding now is that that's not the case. When you pull away that marketing. So I think it's a flaw in the model unless you just have a brand that also is in wholesale, has the margin structure to be successful at wholesale, and is important enough on its own to sustain the growth versus just, you know, digital marketing spend.
Awesome, and I think one thing to call out, he says marketing broadly defined, obviously, and in the context of this, right, he's referring to paid social, digital media, direct response, performance marketing, bottom funnel demand capture. I think we assumed that, but just wanted to make that point clear. So we go on to the next. So this slide broadly will present a little bit of a framework that I think guides how we'll talk a little bit about the focus areas in how we address these three blockers, primarily around brand here at the center, but what are these things that our CFOs and CEOs care about, right? And then how can we start to speak that language rather than maybe some of the other ways that we can approach? I guess just quick show of hands, audience participation. How many people in here have had a conversation with the CEO or CFO that didn't really go the way you planned? Raise your hand. Wow, so everyone in here just crushes it when they talk with the CEO. You get the budget, you get the That's awesome. Cool. So you should teach us how to do. I'm kidding.
I saw some hands.
I know. I saw some hands. I was kidding. So generally, this is the bit of framework that we want to maybe focus on as each of the plays that we go through kind of come back to these 4 pillars.
Okay, so the first blocker, what is our play to go to take down this CFO?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've learned and what I've seen work with a lot of the brands that we work with, smaller than us, much larger than us, is we're starting to construct this narrative as a marketer that makes us relevant and valuable to CEO, CFO. And it starts with, like, where do we start? We start with the fear we want to run from. And so that's where we kind of start things and we orient first around there, but not necessarily, oh, my CTR is down, or some other sort of, let's call it, myopic marketing metric, but speak within the context of the things that are talked about on public company earnings calls, for instance. So why don't we jump to the next one. So some of these things, right, that Dave talked about in the video, right, around margin erosion, revenue volatility, discount or promo reliance, or the need or the desire to run these quick shot, right? Let's see if we can hit this month's number by pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Retail dependence, acquisition cost inflation, competitive pressure. And all these things are things that keep a CEO up at night, right? And so I think the general idea is, and we can pick one of them while I was operating, dealt with all of them at different times, sometimes all of them at once. But I think one of them that a lot of the brands that I'm currently working with are dealing with is this just discount reliance, or just feeling like, okay, the main lever I have right now is some kind of promo or some kind of offer that should hopefully get someone to take action, or buy this month so I can hit my number, or help bring them in because gas prices effectively doubled in the last however many months, or something like that, right? Really kind of trading tomorrow for today. So I think as we go through today's little experience, we might talk about like this discount or promo reliance. So step 2 is, how do we start trying to make the business case in the language, again, less around here's my campaign and here's the set of tactics and inputs, but how do we start thinking about the whole conversation from the perspective of, hey, here's how my brand work will ladder up to this extremely strategically important core business metric, and some of the things that we can align around here, right? Baseline demand, when paid media and promotions are reduced, do we have that? Are we building that? Easy ways to test that, easy ways to just sort of see it longitudinally. Pricing power when costs rise. We all dealt with tariffs. Well, probably most of us dealt with it. How did we deal with that? Could we pass along? Could we not? If any of us are spending money on any of the ad platforms, right? The cost just to show up and place an ad is going up 20, 25% a year, compounding it. The math doesn't math. And then, leverage with retailers or different channels. How are we going to have the conversation where we can just ladder to these sorts of outcomes? And it does take a bit of work, which I'll talk about in step 3.
Okay, step 3.
So we talked about the problematic metric. We then talked about how we might think about, okay, here's the compelling vision, right? Fear we want to run from, compelling vision we want to run to, and then how are we going to convey the business case, right? Very straightforward. It's at least one of the things that I've learned is that every forecast is wrong, right? Every prediction is wrong. The CFO's wrong, just as much as you're probably wrong with your forecast. They're maybe better at kind of coming across as knowing all the things, but in the same way, we would just make reasonable assumptions on what we think we can accomplish, but tie it to our P&L. So it might mean that we have to get our hands on these sorts of financial statements and become a little bit more fluent in those financial statements. But how can we just make the reasonable case that when these things happen, funnel construction, whatever it might be, we'll talk about it, we can actually help achieve the business case, the business outcome, that compelling vision of the future. Let's call it more resilience, more pricing power. We'll get into some examples. But leave the conversation for the inputs, the marketing tactics, right? Just with our internal team, because that's less relevant, obviously, to the conversation. It's how are we driving that pricing power, that reduced volatility.
So to sum up play number 1, don't ask for brand budget. Lead the business through the problem the brand is meant to solve. So that leads us to blocker number 2, which is the CFO is focused on misleading metrics. So we all know the CFO is tasked with achieving growth and company value, and he needs to show that on a 3-month cycle. That in turn means CMOs tend to want to show that they're having a financial impact on a 3-month cycle, which means everyone seems to focus on that short term. And we asked, are you all under pressure to show financial results? No surprise, most of you are. I don't know what the other 9% of you are under pressure for, but 91% of you said you're under pressure to show financial results. But we wanted to ask that question to get out, what does that pressure do to your marketing strategy? And 67% of you told us it leads to investment in ad formats that deliver measurable short-term impact. So we have our second video. You want to set this up for us?
Yes, absolutely. This one's from Brian Chesky, founder, CEO of Airbnb. As you all probably know, they kind of went through this well-known transition from maybe heavy bottom funnel performance marketing to more of a brand focus. I think sometimes, and this was my assumption before I dug in, it was like we went from all performance to all brand. But if you kind of dig in a little bit more, it was kind of cool where he just talks about balance and the different jobs to be done and how to think about when to use one or the other and how to mix them together with some fun and interesting metaphors. But what's cool
the other
is
thing we're
that,
doing.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Let's just roll it. I had no value to add with what I was going to say.
I'm sorry, could you go back to the video? I hit the wrong button, thank you.
The other thing we're
Oh, sorry, I did it again. I apologize. All right, now we're going to let you
we're
hear
doing
them.
is, as you know, Lenny, we're spending a lot of money in performance marketing. I don't think performance marketing is a bad thing. I think of performance marketing as a laser. Actually, my co-founder, who obviously you know well, Joe, used to have this metaphor of lasers, flashbulbs, and chandeliers. If you want to light up a room, performance marketing is a laser. It can light up a corner of a room. You don't want to use a bunch of lasers to light up an entire room. You should use a chandelier. And that's what brand marketing is. But if you do need to laser in balance supply and demand, then performance marketing is really good. It literally lasers in. Performance marketing, though, doesn't create very good accumulating advantages because it's not an investment. Now, if you want to build it permanently, like Booking.com, if you have a really high ROI, now you can have a performance marketing arbitrage business. But assuming you don't want an arbitrage business, you actually need to be investing.
So this really does take us back to the multiplier effect, that you need to have your chandelier be the full light, and then the performance is the lasers. So he's just upholding our multiplier effect. But another thing that both Dave and Brian alluded to was the idea that like short-term can feel efficient, but it's not very effective. And in the multiplier effect, we called this the doom loop. I know at Chubbies you had some experience with the doom loop. Do you want to tell us how you got into that and how you got out of it?
Yeah, not proud about that, but because it's not fun when it happens. But I think maybe we've all dealt with some version of it where I think it all starts when we miss a number or we forecast incorrectly or something like that, and we just kind of feel the need to pull on that thing to see if we can hit that number, and we start with that jolt, right? And then at least what happened to us is we just kind of constantly rationalize, where maybe the first one is just to like a limited audience. Maybe it just goes to our best customers, because they deserve it. And then it's at this number, it lasts for this long, and then the next one, because it felt great and it worked. But then the next one is maybe a little bit more of a discount, goes a little bit more broad. Maybe we put it out to everybody because it's value adding, right? I mean, they're getting a great product, at a great price. And then it just kind of keeps going. And then as it relates to how we're then spending our dollars, well, we start to then, especially as you feel like you're getting a little bit more sophisticated, you're like, I got all this data, and there's this ROAS number, and it feels great when it goes up. And you're not really that close to, well, that ROAS number goes up, but my business really isn't changing much, because there's so much other stuff going on. But then you zoom out and you look back and you're just kind of like, huh, they say you waste a lot of money on brand advertising, but I just think I wasted so much more money on all this bottom funnel demand capture because I was just retargeting all of the people who are already at my website, already going to purchase. Isn't that funny that the CFO is kind of like, I don't have money to light on fire, but you kind of go back and you're like, well, that's exactly what we've been doing as ROAS chasers. So anyways, we lived that life, and it's not a great life to live. But luckily, we did get to a place where, unfortunately, almost going out of business, like the unit economic model stops working, so we had to kind of like take a step back. And I think one of the things, and we'll start to talk about this, but that I think we all know and love, right? We just kind of realized the 95-5 rule is a real thing for us. And realized that, shoot, we're spending 100% of our marketing dollars on that 5%. Because we thought that's the totality of the universe. And if I could just make a slightly more convincing ad, then I'll get them. But clearly did not end up being the case. So we were able to make that transition and start growing again, much more profitably, much more sustainably. But shoot, that doom loop was not fun.
So the play for Blocker 2, how do we get the C-suite out of the doom loop?
Yes. So I think there's a little bit of a stepping back that I kind of mentioned if we want to go on to the next slide, right? There's this little like juxtaposition. And I guess it's all how we framed it, because there's this whole idea of, okay, well, we got to hit the numbers, we got to have urgency. But then there's the other idea, well, if you frame what you're doing as an arbitrage business, I guess unless you're Booking.com, and if you're Booking.com in the audience, I actually don't necessarily agree with Brian because I like the Booking.yeah ads, but that's an aside. But we could talk about, like, we're not trying to build an arbitrage business, right? We're trying to build things that compound. Like if any of us are compensated by the value of the stock price, right? Over time, that compounding happens as we build the moats and as we build the compounding advantages. And as it's something that we can not only drive on the efficiency side, but the effectiveness side of things. So trying to have the conversation be around these things, right? This whole point of this brand thing becomes more effective in the context of the CEO and CFO, at least I've found, and what I've seen, when we talk about these things from an inarguable perspective, right? So we're trying to build the things on the right. But I think the point from this video that's also helpful, it's not really one or the other, right? Because we got to do both. But to say you're not going to do the things on the right? No one's going to say that. So to the extent we can align on that, it makes the conversation a lot easier.
And then you had some questions you could ask to get them, some leading questions, you called them.
Yeah. I mean, we could start to talk about incrementality, right? I mean, it might get a little bit too nichey, but just I think it's at the level of, hey, are we associating our marketing dollars with transactions, or are we causing transactions? And again, I think inarguably any CFO or CFO would want to clearly cause transactions that wouldn't have happened anyways, right? When we're starting to talk about that demand capture piece. But then having the conversation be around like variable profit, right? Like marketers, we might not own fixed costs, but shoot, we own variable profit or contribution. And that's something that we as marketers can understand, right? There's COGS, and we may or may not control that to the total extent, but we certainly control discounts, promos, marketing costs, and all these other variables associated with selling our products. Let's start to have the conversation on that front. And then as it just relates to the baseline demand, and we can talk about brand search all day, obviously, and base sales over time, like how resilient is the business truly that we're building?
So that takes us to our third and final blocker, that advertising is disconnected from business goals. And from our survey, you told us that this is something a lot of you are really dealing with, because 60% said that their C-suite does not understand or clearly define the role of advertising at your company. And busy CEOs and CFOs, they're dealing with a lot. They're not going to invite you into strategy conversations if they haven't already. So you need to give them a reason to invite you into the strategy. Only 25% of you have full involvement in setting organizational strategy, and only 15% told us they strongly agree that the C-suite buys advertising's role and is a driver of business growth. So we have a big hitter, a very someone I think you all know who is going to talk about how he thinks about brand at his companies.
Brands are moats. A strong brand is really potent stuff. It's not a great business when you have to have a prayer session before you raise your prices a penny. I mean, you are in a tough business then. And I would say you can almost measure the strength of a business over time by the agony they go through in determining whether a price increase can be sustained.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to find a business with a wide and long-lasting moat around it, protecting a terrific economic castle. In essence, that's what business is all about. What we're trying to find is a business that, for one reason or another, it can be because of its position in the consumer's mind, it can be because of a technological advantage, for any kind of reason at all, that it has this moat around it. And then what we have to decide is all moats are subject to attack in a capitalistic system. So everybody is going to try. If you've got a big castle in there, people are going to be trying to figure out how to get to it. And what we have to decide, and most moats aren't worth a damn in capitalism. I mean, that's the nature of it, and it's a constructive thing that that's the case. But we are trying to figure out why is that castle still standing? And what's going to keep it standing or cause it not to be standing 5, 10, 20 years from now? What are the key factors, and how permanent are they?
The brand has to stand for something in the consumer's mind, because in the end, the retailer may want to shift to a house brand, private label, private label's been around forever in the soft drink field. I mean, I can remember when I was looking at Cott Beverage and all of those and thinking, what will it do to us? I remember when Sam Walton sent me the first six-pack. He told me it was the first six-pack of Sam's Cola 20 years ago. And believe me, Walmart has plenty of power, but so does Coca-Cola. And the brand, you've got to nourish them. You've got to take very, very, very good care of them. They have to stand for the promise that's in people's mind about them. But a lot of people have tried to, I don't know how many dozens or maybe hundreds of cola beverages there have been over the years. RC Cola, they came up with the first diet product back in the early 60s. And that looked like a big maneuver. Wilkinson came up with a blade back in the 60s after Gillette. But Gillette ends up with 70% by dollar value worldwide of razor blades after 100 years. So you've got to protect a brand. You've got to enhance it in every way. You've got to get a promise in people's minds that gets delivered that way. But that's the question Charlie and I faced in 1972 when we looked at See's. See's was selling for $1.95 a pound. Russell Stover was selling a little cheaper. And you had to decide how much damage could a Russell Stover do if they came after See's and they copied our shops and all that sort of thing. If you protect a brand, if you got a terrific brand and you protect it, it's a fabulous asset.
So how do we show the C-suite the advantages of building the moat?
That is a great question. First of all, that video is awesome, right? I mean, Buffett, as the most successful, financially minded CEO probably of all time, just ranting and raving about the importance of brand. And when I saw those clips, I was like, oh my God, this is gold. So moat, right? Thanks, Sora 2 image model, for building this. But let's talk a little bit about why we need it, and then some of the benefits of it, right? And Buffett mentioned them so eloquently, right? There's the competitive pressures for us. We were at, I don't know, some scale, let's say 50, 60 million a year, something like that. And then you've got all of these tiny shorts brands popping up all over the place, having the same, right, irreverent or whatever, kitschy approach. And you're just kind of like, what is happening? Why don't you go off and do something else? But that's capitalism, right? And people are going to come for our stuff. And what we learned, because people would go to our manufacturers, people would make the exact same product that we made. An example, as a sort of like a bigger player, this was back when Abercrombie was not as cool. Now it's cool, but think about 12, 13 years ago, less cool. They made the exact same product, and they called it the campus short. And it was wild, and it freaked us out. But what was really interesting is that kind of like the reaction from our community, they kind of like came to bat for us, and they were just like, no, this is not it, this is the copycat, blah, 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 blah. And there was no way we could have gotten that unless we had sort of like started to build community and build that brand and kind of like get the message out there more broadly as just one simple example. But Buffett brings it up, right, from the how are we going to get either our wholesale prices driven down, which we had to deal with a ton, how we're going to not necessarily be the first mover. I mean, I think a lot of CEOs tend to come up through the ranks of maybe product. And I think this is a great example where, maybe RC Cola coming out first, and it not necessarily being the one who wins, right, from a first mover perspective. So I think the general idea, right, is this moat that protects our profits, and how are we going to build that thing? And according to Buffett, right, brand is the thing.
Brand building is going to help us build the moat. And in fact, when we asked in the survey for you to give us the top objectives for your C-suite at your company, only one of those is performance marketing going to help you with short-term sales. Profitability, long-term demand, market share, and enterprise value, all much better served by brand building. So what should we leave the people with, Preston? What should we leave them with as takeaways to go back to their C-suite? What should they be talking about?
I think we should just like give you guys the links to those videos, and then you could just forward them along to your CFOs and CEOs. I mean, those are some of the best CEOs operating consumer brands out there, and you just hear them ranting and raving about the importance of brand building. And I think a lot of people in here in this room have seen these cycles, right, that we go through, where they're, it's all that matters is performance, right? We've got all this data, right? But I think we've got so much data out there that just proves that the brands that generate a crap ton of profits over a long period of time are the ones with strong brands, right? This stuff it's like gravity. You can't really debate it. It becomes something that gets debatable when we're arguing on the margin, right? When we're like, attribution this, attribute ROAS, but at the end of the day, right, you got to reach a lot of people, catch them when they're not thinking about you, make them feel something, and just let them buy from you rather than having to do only hard sells all the time.
So thank you so much for having us. If you'd like a copy of the Multiplier Playbook, you can get it here. Thanks very much. We really enjoyed being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Are we doing questions?
So you can't get away that fast.
Okay.
All right, so I've got a few questions from the group, so we'll keep you up here. So thank you guys. Have you ever encountered or heard of a CEO, CFO, maybe Preston, this will be a good one for you, who are faced with this great data that we get from the playbook and still want to cut the brand budget? Any tips on how to respond, even if you've given them all the proof in the world and they're just still not buying in?
I think there's a practical answer, and then there's like an interesting thought experiment answer that I think maybe we've all dealt with at one point or the other. The latter is go ahead, cut it, take it to zero, and just like wait, because we know what's going to happen. Like the key stats are going to, can I say light profanity?
Sure.
The key stats are going to go to shit, and it doesn't take that long for it to happen. And I'm sure I've stumbled into this situation multiple times where it just kind of happens, and then you just see these metrics start to erode, whether it be brand search or whether it be if we're talking e-com businesses, right? Sessions of high quality, engaged sessions, et cetera, et cetera. So let it happen, I guess, is one thing. The other is send them these videos.
And then I guess I got to follow up on that one. Have you ever had a CEO or C-suite say, I don't buy into the 5-95 rule, and how did you get them over it?
Say, great. What is it? 80-20? Well, it's certainly not 50-50, and it's certainly not 5% out of market, 95 in market. It's like, I guess that's how we can debate the margin, right? But if we take it to the extreme, it's impossible to say I'm always in the market for toilet paper, right? And I don't think anyone's going to necessarily say that. So the point is the point that how do we get you in a place where when the rational appeal is in one ear, out the other, but the emotional appeal is real. That's what we're trying to do. So give them that point. Sure, 95.5, great, but it's not the alternative.
And do you have a specific moment when they saw it and had that aha moment when you made the pivot from heavy performance into a better balance?
So the great thing that I think is in anyone who cares about building the brand and knows that that's important is that, the digital ad platforms right now, particularly the Metas, the Googles, et cetera, are so saturated because everyone's sending the same dollars to the same people. So by being able to just shave off a little bit of budget and say, hey, let me just do this with it and I'll show you what's going to happen, it's happening. And there isn't this, what I like to call this trough of despair that every CFO is like, oh, we can't miss our numbers for the next 6 months while your brand thing pays off. That's not happening right now because the costs to just run media on Meta, if you're doing bottom funnel demand capture or any of these platforms, is just ballooning, right? Because they're not growing users, but they got to keep hitting their 25 to 30% revenue growth. So it's actually a great time for people, for brand builders, to just be like, let me just shave this amount because it's not buying us anything. And let's try this thing that's actually going to reach net new people that we haven't been reaching forever because we've been just trying to hit the people who are going to click on an ad and show me some ROAS.
Excellent answer. All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you guys.